When I called to ask when the wedding was, she said, "We already got married, Mom. We only invited people who really matter. Just send the beach house keys and stop being so dramatic." I just smiled and hung up. 3 days later, I left a wedding gift at their door that made her husband scream nonstop. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how we got here, because this story didn't start with that phone call. It started 2 years ago when my daughter Madison brought home Trevor for the first time. I'm Carol, 65 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew my daughter. We used to talk every day. She'd call during her lunch break, and we'd chat about everything and nothing. Work gossip, the latest Netflix series, her dating disasters. When she met Trevor, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved someone who appreciated her brilliant mind and kind heart. "Mom, he's different," she'd said that first night, practically glowing. "He really gets me." I'd prepared my famous lasagna, the one Madison had been requesting since she was 12. Trevor arrived in an expensive suit, carrying roses and compliments about my home. He was handsome in that polished way that usually made me suspicious. But Madison was so happy, I pushed my doubts aside. During dinner, he asked thoughtful questions about my nursing career and seemed genuinely interested in my stories. He complimented the lasagna, helped clear the table, and even offered to do dishes. Perfect gentleman behavior that should have been charming, but felt somehow rehearsed. "Your mother raised an amazing daughter," he told me as he hugged me goodbye. "You must be so proud." I was proud. Madison had a successful marketing career, owned her own condo, and had never needed to rely on anyone for anything. She was independent, strong-willed, and confident, everything I'd raised her to be. But that night, something nagged at me. Maybe it was the way he spoke about Madison, like she was a prize he'd won, or how he'd mentioned my beautiful beachfront property 3 times during dinner. I owned a small beach house in Cape Cod that had been in my family for 15 years, a place where Madison and I spent every summer together. "He's very interested in our traditions," I told my sister Janet the next day. "That's sweet, Carol. It means he wants to be part of the family." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something about Trevor's perfect smile reminded me of my ex-husband Robert, Madison's father. Robert had that same charm, that same way of making you feel special until he decided you were no longer useful to him. Over the next few months, I watched Trevor slowly insert himself into every aspect of Madison's life. He had opinions about her friends, her job, even her relationship with me. The daily phone calls became weekly, then monthly, then barely at all. "Trevor thinks I should focus more on our relationship," Madison explained when I asked why she seemed distant. "He says successful couples prioritize each other." That should have been my first red flag, but I told myself I was being overprotective. Madison was 28, perfectly capable of making her own decisions. If she was happy, I should be happy for her. But then came the engagement party I wasn't invited to. I found out about Madison's engagement the same way strangers did, through Facebook. A photo of her left hand wearing a massive diamond ring, with the caption, "He asked. I said yes, can't wait to start our forever together." 53 likes and counting. Comments from friends and co-workers congratulating her. Not one of them asking where her mother was, because most of them had probably assumed I already knew. I stared at that photo for 10 minutes, my coffee growing cold as I tried to process what I was seeing. My daughter was engaged, and I'd learned about it from social media. I called her immediately. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry." Madison's voice was breathless, excited. "It just happened last night, and we were so caught up in the moment. Trevor surprised me at our favorite restaurant, and then we went back to his place and called his parents. And it got so late, and I was going to call you this morning, I swear." "Congratulations, sweetheart." I forced warmth into my voice. "Tell me everything." And she did. For 20 minutes, she gushed about the proposal, the ring, how romantic it all was, how Trevor's parents had immediately started planning an engagement party at their country club, how they were thinking of a spring wedding. "When's the engagement party?" I asked. There was a pause. "Next Saturday. It's going to be small, just immediate family and a few close friends." "Should I plan to drive down Friday night?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, about that. Trevor's family has very specific ideas about these events. His mother is quite traditional, and she's planned everything according to their customs." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What does that mean, Madison? It means, well, it's really just for Trevor's side of the family. And a few of our couple friends. It's not that you're not important. It's just that they have this way of doing things, and Trevor thinks it's better if we respect that. Trevor thinks. Everything had become about what Trevor thinks. I see. I kept my voice carefully neutral. And what do you think? I think Trevor knows his family better than I do, and I want to start off on the right foot with them. You understand, right? We'll do something special, just the three of us soon. That was 6 months ago. We never did anything special, just the three of us. In fact, I'd only seen Trevor twice since then, and both times he'd been polite but distant, like I was Madison's elderly aunt he had to tolerate rather than her mother, who'd raised her alone after her father abandoned us when she was 8. The wedding planning happened around me, not with me. Madison would mention details in passing. They'd found a venue, booked a photographer, chosen flowers. But when I offered to help or asked about specific plans, I was met with vague responses about how Trevor's handling most of it, or his mother has connections. 3 months ago, I asked about the date so I could plan time off from my part-time job at the local library. We're thinking early October, Madison said. Probably the second weekend. Trevor's researching venues. That sounds lovely. October in New England is beautiful. Are you thinking of having it at the beach house? I could. Oh no, Mom. Trevor wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard beach wedding. The dismissal stung more than I expected. Madison had always loved our beach house. As a child, she'd declared she wanted to get married there someday, barefoot in the sand with fairy lights strung between the dunes. Of course, I said. Whatever makes you happy. But I wasn't invited to the venue tours. I wasn't asked about the guest list. I wasn't included in the dress shopping trips that Madison posted about on Instagram, her future mother-in-law beaming beside her in every photo. I was becoming a spectator in my own daughter's life. The final blow came exactly 2 weeks ago. Madison called while I was reorganizing my linen closet, a mundane Tuesday evening task that would be forever marked in my memory as the moment everything changed. Mom, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be cool about it. Nothing good ever followed that phrase, but I took a deep breath and sat down on my bed. What is it, sweetheart? Trevor's been doing some research about family dynamics and healthy boundaries in marriage. He thinks it's really important that we establish our independence as a couple from the very beginning. I felt that familiar chill. What kind of independence? Well, he pointed out that I've been relying on you emotionally for most of my life, like calling you when I'm stressed or upset instead of working through things with my partner. He thinks that might create problems in our marriage. Madison, talking to your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. But is it? Trevor showed me some articles about women who prioritize their mothers over their husbands and how that destroys marriages. I don't want to be that wife, Mom. I closed my eyes, recognizing the manipulation for what it was. Trevor was isolating Madison from her support system, and he was making her believe it was for her own good. What does this mean practically? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. It means we need to establish some boundaries. Less frequent contact, more space for Trevor and me to build our own traditions. And, she hesitated, Trevor thinks it would be healthier if we spent the holidays with his family this year. Just to break the pattern of dependence. The holidays. We'd spent every Christmas together since Robert left. It was our tradition. Our time. Madison would drive up from Boston on Christmas Eve, and we'd stay in our pajamas until noon, drinking hot chocolate and opening presents like she was still 12 years old. I see. My voice sounded strange, distant. Anything else? Actually, yes. Trevor thinks the beach house situation is complicated. What about the beach house? Well, you know I've always assumed I'd inherit it someday. But Trevor pointed out that puts a lot of pressure on our relationship. Like, he feels like he can never truly relax there because it's not really ours, it's yours. And if something happened between us and you, we'd lose our vacation spot. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you asking me to sign the house over to you? Not exactly. Trevor thinks it would be better if we just found our own place. Somewhere that's truly ours. He doesn't want to feel like he's constantly under scrutiny from you when we're supposed to be relaxing. Under scrutiny. From me, the woman who'd barely seen him in the past year. Madison, that house has been in our family for 15 years. It's where you learn to swim, where we've made thousands of memories together. I know, Mom, and I treasure those memories, but I'm starting a new family now, with Trevor, and he needs to feel like we have our own special places. Our own special places. Places that didn't include me. I ended that conversation with promises to think about everything and respect their need for space. But inside, I was already planning. Not revenge, not yet. But I was going to find out exactly who Trevor really was and what he wanted from my daughter. It took me exactly 1 week of careful internet searches and a few phone calls to Madison's college friends to piece together Trevor's pattern. Madison wasn't his first wealthy, naive girlfriend. There was Emma, whose family owned a successful restaurant chain. She'd also been isolated from her family before their wedding was called off when her father discovered Trevor's gambling debts. And before Emma, there was Sarah, whose trust fund Trevor had tried to access before her brothers intervened. Trevor Morrison wasn't just controlling. He was a predator who specialized in intelligent, successful women with family money. And Madison, with her successful career and expectation of inheriting valuable beachfront property, was his latest mark. That's when I started planning my wedding gift. The phone call that changed everything came 3 days ago, on a Wednesday morning while I was deadheading my roses. Madison's name appeared on my phone screen, and for a split second, I felt that old surge of joy before remembering how things stood between us now. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was different, flat, mechanical. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you? I'm calling to let you know that Trevor and I got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony, just immediate family and our closest friends." I stopped breathing. "Yesterday? But I thought you were having a wedding in October." "We decided to do something more intimate. Trevor felt like a big wedding was too much pressure, too commercial. We found a beautiful venue in Martha's Vineyard and kept it simple. Simple. And secret, apparently." "Congratulations," I managed. "I'm sure it was beautiful." "It was. Perfect, really. Trevor's parents were there and his sister flew in from California. My friend Jessica was my maid of honor, and Trevor's best friend Tom was his best man. The photographer got some amazing shots. She was listing off details like she was reading from a catalog, not describing the happiest day of her life. But what struck me most was what she wasn't saying. "That sounds lovely, Madison. I'm happy for you." "Thanks. Oh, and Mom? Trevor and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the beach house. We're thinking of spending our honeymoon there since we didn't have time to plan a proper trip." There it was. The real reason for the call. Not to share her joy with her mother, not to include me in this major life milestone, but to ask for the keys to property they'd already decided should be theirs. "The keys to the beach house," I repeated slowly. "Right. Trevor's really excited to see it. I've told him so much about it over the years. He's particularly interested in the renovations you've done and the property value appreciation." Property value appreciation. How romantic. "Madison, when you say you got married yesterday, do you mean you had a ceremony? Or do you mean you're legally married?" "Both. We got the license last week and had the ceremony yesterday." "Why?" "Just clarifying. And you didn't think to invite your mother to your wedding?" There was a pause. "Mom, please don't make this dramatic. It was Trevor's decision to keep it small, and honestly, after everything we talked about regarding boundaries, I thought you'd understand." "I understand perfectly." And I did. I understood that my daughter had married a man who had convinced her that excluding her own mother from her wedding was healthy. I understood that Trevor had succeeded in his plan to isolate Madison from the one person who might have protected her from him. "So you'll send the keys? We're hoping to drive up this Friday." "Of course. Sweetheart, I'll make sure you get them." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, staring at my roses and thinking about patterns. Trevor followed patterns. He isolated women from their families, convinced them to give him access to their assets, and then probably moved on when he'd gotten what he wanted or when someone started asking too many questions. But Trevor had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just another helpless mother who would quietly accept being cut out of her daughter's life. He'd underestimated what happens when you back a woman into a corner and take away the thing she loves most in the world. I spent the rest of that day making phone calls and sending emails. By evening, I had everything I needed to give Trevor exactly what he deserved. Not revenge, really. Justice. The wedding gift I was planning would be far more valuable than anything Madison might find on her registry. It would be the gift of truth. I've always believed that the best gifts are the ones that keep on giving. So when I drove to Madison and Trevor's apartment that Friday morning, I made sure my wedding present would provide lasting memories. The package was beautifully wrapped in silver paper with an elegant white bow. Inside was a leather portfolio containing several items that I'd spent the past 72 hours carefully assembling. Trevor was going to love learning about his new family connections. I left it outside their door with a note. "Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Carol." Then I went home and waited. The call came at 2:17 p.m. Madison's number, but Trevor's voice, and he was screaming. "What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy old witch? How dare you send us this garbage?" I set down my teacup gently. "Hello, Trevor. I take it you opened your wedding gift? This isn't funny. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "I'm confused." "Dear, what exactly would you report? That your mother-in-law gave you a wedding gift containing public records and newspaper articles?" In the background, I could hear Madison crying. "Trevor, calm down. Let me talk to her." "No, this woman is insane. She's trying to ruin our marriage before it even starts." I couldn't help but smile. "Trevor, surely you're not upset about me sharing some interesting family history. I thought you'd appreciate knowing about the connections between our families." The truth was, I discovered something absolutely fascinating during my research into Trevor's background. It turns out that Trevor's grandfather, William Morrison, had been involved in a rather significant business dealing with my late husband Robert back in 1987, a real estate development deal that had gone very, very badly. The documents I'd included in the wedding gift told the complete story. How William Morrison and Robert had been partners in a shopping center development project. How Morrison had systematically embezzled funds from their joint accounts. How Robert had lost nearly everything, including his first marriage, because of Morrison's theft. How Morrison had fled to Florida with over $2 million, leaving Robert bankrupt and facing lawsuits from investors. But that wasn't the most interesting part. The most interesting part was what I'd discovered in the final newspaper article from 1993. William Morrison had died in a car accident, but not before confessing on his deathbed to his grandson Trevor about the money he'd stolen and hidden in various accounts. Money that Trevor had been quietly accessing for years. Money that had funded his lifestyle, his expensive clothes, his ability to woo women like Madison without holding down a real job. Money that legally belonged to Robert's estate, which, since Robert had died 3 years ago, now belonged to his only heir, Madison. "Trevor," I said calmly into the phone. "I also included some contact information for the law firm that handled Robert's estate. They're very interested in speaking with you about those offshore accounts your grandfather mentioned in his confession. Apparently, there's quite a bit of money that rightfully belongs to Madison." The screaming stopped abruptly. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had changed. The rage was gone, replaced by something that sounded distinctly like panic. "I never lie, dear. I'm a retired nurse. We're trained to be very precise about facts. But don't take my word for it. I'm sure your grandfather's lawyer in Miami will remember you. Mr. Rodriguez has been very helpful in tracking down the paper trail." I heard Madison in the background asking what was happening, what money I was talking about. "Oh, and Trevor? The beach house keys are in the portfolio too. Consider it my wedding gift to both of you. I'm sure you'll find it very relaxing to discuss your family's financial history while enjoying the ocean views." Then I hung up and poured myself another cup of tea. The next few hours were going to be very interesting indeed. Madison called me at 6:30 that evening. Her voice was hoarse from crying, and I could hear Trevor shouting in the background. "Mom, what did you do?" I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset and feeling more peaceful than I had in months. "I gave you both a wedding gift, sweetheart. Did you read through everything?" "I read enough. Trevor says it's all lies, that you're trying to break us up." "What do you think, Madison?" There was a long pause. I think I need you to explain some things. Trevor's grandfather really stole money from Dad? $2.3 million, according to the bank records. Your father spent years trying to recover it, but William Morrison disappeared. The stress of it contributed to your father leaving us when you were 8. He couldn't handle the financial ruin Or the legal battles. Another pause. And Trevor knew about this money? I could hear Trevor's voice getting closer to the phone, his words muffled but clearly furious. The deathbed confession suggests he did, yes. The private investigator I hired found records of Trevor accessing several of those accounts over the past 5 years. He's been living off money that legally belonged to your father's estate. That's impossible. Trevor has a consulting business. He told me he specializes in investment strategies for high net worth individuals. My heart broke a little for her. Madison, when's the last time you saw Trevor actually work? When's the last time he had a client meeting, or took a business call, or showed you a contract? Silence. In the background, I could hear Trevor demanding that Madison hang up the phone. The law firm wants to meet with you, sweetheart. As Robert's heir, you have a legal claim to that money plus interest. They estimate it's worth nearly $4 million now. $4 million. Madison's voice was barely a whisper. Trevor married you 3 days after I hired the private investigator. The timing seems rather coincidental, don't you think? Now I could hear Trevor clearly. He was telling Madison that I was lying, that I was jealous of their happiness, that I was trying to destroy their marriage because I couldn't stand to see her happy. Madison, I said gently, ask yourself this. If none of this is true, why is Trevor so upset? If his grandfather was innocent, wouldn't he want to clear his family's name? Wouldn't he be curious about getting justice for what happened to your father? The line went quiet except for the sound of Madison breathing. There's something else, I continued. The private investigator also found records of 2 previous engagements, Emma Chen in 2019 and Sarah Walsh in 2021. Both engagements ended when their families discovered Trevor's financial deception. Both women had family money. Both were isolated from their support systems before the truth came out. Stop, Madison whispered. I have their contact information if you'd like to speak with them. I said stop. The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked out at the darkening sky. Tomorrow, Madison would have to decide what to believe. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between the man who had isolated her from everyone who loved her and the truth that could set her free. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Trevor Morrison was going to sleep, knowing that his carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around him, and I was going to sleep better than I had in months, knowing that my daughter finally had all the information she needed to make the right choice. The gift that keeps on giving, indeed. Madison didn't call back that night or the next day, but on Sunday morning I found her sitting on my front porch steps, still wearing the same clothes from Friday. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair unwashed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Tell me everything, she said without even saying hello. I made coffee and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd planned her college applications, where we'd shared 1,000 conversations about everything and nothing. Now we were going to talk about how the man she'd married was a fraud. Trevor left yesterday, she said, staring into her coffee cup. Packed 2 suitcases and said he needed time to think. He told me you were poisoning our marriage with lies, and that if I believed you over him, then maybe we weren't meant to be together. Classic manipulation. Give the victim an ultimatum that makes them feel responsible for the relationship's failure. Where did he go? I don't know. He turned off his phone. But Mom, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I found something. Madison pulled out a manila folder from her purse. After Trevor left, I went through his things, his laptop, his desk, everything. I found these. She spread out printed emails across my kitchen table. They were correspondence between Trevor and someone named Marcus Webb, discussing the Morrison inheritance and maintaining access to offshore accounts. The dates went back 2 years, long before Trevor had even met Madison. There's more, Madison said, her voice getting stronger. I called Emma Chen yesterday. The woman from your private investigator's report. I raised an eyebrow. What did she tell you? Everything. How Trevor isolated her from her family, convinced her to put him on her bank accounts, even had her write a will leaving everything to him. Her father hired a detective and discovered Trevor's pattern. When they confronted him, he disappeared overnight. Madison pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. Emma put me in touch with Sarah Walsh, too. Same story, Mom. Exact same pattern. He finds successful women with family money, charms them, isolates them from their support systems, and then gains access to their assets. I reached across and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Don't apologize. You tried to warn me, and I chose not to listen. I chose to believe a man I'd known for 2 years over the mother who raised me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Emma told me something else. She said Trevor actually researched us before he even accidentally met me at that coffee shop. He knew about the beach house, knew about Dad's financial troubles, knew about you being a widow. The coffee shop meeting. Madison had always thought it was fate that she'd literally bumped into Trevor, spilling coffee on his expensive shirt, leading to their first conversation. Turns out fate had nothing to do with it. What are you going to do? I asked. Madison looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 12 years old and had decided to stand up to a bully at school. Determined, fierce, ready for a fight. I'm going to destroy him, she said simply, but I'm going to need your help. For the first time in 2 years, my daughter was asking for my help instead of pushing me away. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I smiled with genuine happiness. Tell me what you need. The plan we developed was beautifully simple. Trevor would come back eventually. Men like him always do when they think the crisis has passed. He'd apologize, promise to change, maybe even claim he'd been confused or overwhelmed by the accusations. He'd try to smooth things over and get back to his original plan of accessing Madison's assets. But when he came back, we'd be ready for him. Madison called the law firm that Monday and met with Robert's estate attorney, Patricia Winters. The news was even better than I'd hoped. Not only did Madison have a legal claim to the money Trevor's grandfather had stolen, but because Trevor had been accessing those accounts while knowing they contained stolen funds, he could be charged with criminal conspiracy and money laundering. The statute of limitations on the original theft has expired, Patricia explained to Madison over the phone, but your husband's recent access to those accounts resets the legal clock. He's essentially been receiving stolen property for years. Patricia also connected Madison with a federal investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Agent Jennifer Liu had been tracking Trevor's pattern for months, building a case based on complaints from Emma and Sarah's families. We've been waiting for the right opportunity to move forward, Agent Liu told us during a conference call. Your situation provides the final pieces we need. If you're willing to cooperate, we can set up a controlled operation. Madison agreed immediately. She wanted Trevor held accountable, not just for what he'd done to her, but for what he'd done to Emma and Sarah, and who knows how many other women. Wednesday afternoon, Trevor texted Madison. Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home. Madison showed me the message. Should I respond? Tell him you miss him too, and that you're sorry for doubting him. Tell him you realize I was just jealous and trying to cause trouble. She typed the message, her jaw clenched with anger, but her words perfectly crafted to appeal to Trevor's ego. He responded within minutes, saying he'd be home by Friday evening and that they could start fresh. Agent Liu briefed us Thursday morning. The apartment will be monitored. Madison, you'll be wearing a wire, and we'll have agents positioned nearby. All you need to do is get him to admit he knew about the stolen money and that he married you to gain access to your inheritance. What if he doesn't confess? Madison asked. Then we proceed with the financial evidence we already have, but a recorded confession would strengthen the case significantly and help us pursue charges related to his other victims. Friday evening came faster than I expected. I sat in my living room, supposedly reading a book, but actually staring at my phone, waiting for updates. Agent Liu had given me a number to call if Madison needed help, though they assured me the apartment was completely secure. At 7:43 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. He's here. At 8:15 p.m., he brought flowers and wine, playing the perfect apologetic husband. At 8:52 p.m., he's talking about planning a real honeymoon, asking about accessing my savings account for deposits. At 9:31 p.m., got him to admit he knew about the offshore accounts. FBI moving in now. I set down my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Trevor Morrison's predatory career was officially over. But somehow, I suspected the most satisfying part was still to come. The local news picked up the story by Monday morning. Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud scheme was the headline in the Portland Press-Herald. They didn't mention Madison by name, referring to her only as the most recent victim. But Trevor's mugshot was prominently displayed. He looked exactly like what he was, a a common criminal whose charm had finally run out. Madison came over for lunch that day, bringing Chinese takeout and looking lighter than she had in months. "Agent Liu called this morning," she said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "Trevor's been formally charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and fraud across multiple states. His bail was set at $500,000. I nearly choked on my tea. $500,000? Apparently he's considered a flight risk since he has access to offshore accounts and a history of disappearing when confronted. His parents can't afford the bail, and his accounts have been frozen pending investigation." We ate our lunch in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Madison spoke again. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." I set down my chopsticks. "What is it? How long did you know? How long did—" "About Trevor's pattern? About what he was really after?" I considered lying or softening the truth, but Madison deserved honesty. "I suspected something was wrong from the beginning, but I didn't have proof until about 3 months ago. That's when I hired the private investigator." 3 months ago? Madison nodded slowly. "Right around the time I told you about the boundaries conversation." "Yes, and you didn't try to warn me directly because you knew I wouldn't believe you." I met her eyes. "Would you have?" She shook her head. "No. I would have thought you were jealous or trying to interfere. Trevor had me so convinced that you were the problem." She paused, playing with her noodles. "How did you know to look into his grandfather's background?" "I recognized the name Morrison from your father's old papers. When I realized the connection, I knew there had to be more to the story." Madison was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and sad. "I was so mean to you, Mom. I said terrible things. I excluded you from my own wedding because he convinced me it was healthy." "Madison, no. Let me finish. I chose a man I'd known for 2 years over the mother who sacrificed everything to raise me alone. I believed his version of what family should look like instead of trusting my own experience. I'm so ashamed." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were manipulated by an expert predator. That's not your fault. But I should have seen through him. I'm smart, educated, successful. How did I fall for it? Because he targeted those exact qualities. He found a strong, independent woman and convinced her that her strength was actually weakness. That's what predators do, sweetheart. They don't target weak people. They target people who have something they want." Madison squeezed my hand. "How do I make this right between us? You already have. You're here, you're safe, and you're free. That's all I ever wanted." We finished our lunch and spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums. Madison pointing out pictures from beach house summers and asking me to tell her stories she'd forgotten. It felt like we were rebuilding something that had been broken, brick by brick. That evening, as Madison was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. "Mom, there's going to be a civil trial." "To be a civil." "Agent Liu says the families of Trevor's other victims are filing a class action lawsuit to recover their losses. They want me to be part of it. Are you going to join them?" Madison smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, it was the fierce, determined smile I remembered from her childhood. "Oh, absolutely. I'm going to make sure Trevor Morrison never has the opportunity to hurt another woman again." That's my girl, I thought. Welcome back. The trial began 6 weeks later, and it was everything I could have hoped for. Patricia Winters had been right about the money. Madison was entitled to nearly $4 million in recovered assets, plus interest and damages. But more importantly, the prosecution had built an airtight case against Trevor that exposed his entire operation. Emma Chen flew in from Seattle to testify, looking confident and professional in a navy blue suit. Sarah Walsh drove up from New York, clearly nervous but determined to see justice done. Together with Madison, they painted a picture of a systematic predator who had refined his technique over years of practice. I sat in the gallery every day, watching my daughter tell her story with dignity and strength. She testified about the isolation, the manipulation, the way Trevor had convinced her to doubt her own instincts and cut ties with her family. She spoke calmly and clearly, never breaking down, never letting emotion overwhelm her facts. Trevor's defense attorney tried to portray him as a misguided young man who had made poor choices but wasn't a criminal mastermind. That strategy fell apart when Agent Liu presented evidence of Trevor's detailed research into each of his victims. including surveillance photos of Madison taken weeks before their accidental meeting. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution called Marcus Webb, the man who had been corresponding with Trevor about the offshore accounts. Webb had been arrested as an accomplice and had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Mr. Morrison contacted me in 2018, Webb testified, asking for help accessing accounts his grandfather had established before his death. When I explained the legal complexities, he told me he was working on a long-term plan to legitimize his access to the funds. What did he mean by long-term plan? The prosecutor asked. He said he was going to marry someone with a legal claim to the money. He showed me newspaper articles about Robert Thompson's financial losses and explained that Thompson's heir would be the rightful owner of the stolen funds. He said once he gained access to that person's finances through marriage, he could claim the offshore money as community property. Madison turned pale at this testimony. The prosecutor continued questioning Webb. Did Mr. Morrison discuss specific targets for this plan? Yes. He had identified 3 potential candidates based on their family financial histories and personal circumstances. He showed me social media profiles and explained why each woman would be vulnerable to his approach. Was one of those women Madison Thompson? Yes. He said she was the ideal target because she was successful but emotionally isolated after her father's abandonment, close to her mother who owned valuable property, and naive about relationships due to limited dating experience. I watched Madison's face as she heard herself described as a target, a mark to be exploited. The pain in her eyes was terrible, but beneath it, I saw something else. Rage. Pure, focused rage at the man who had studied her vulnerabilities like a predator studies prey. Trevor's attorney objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The jury now understood that Trevor hadn't simply been accessing stolen money. He had orchestrated an elaborate, multi-year plan to manipulate Madison into marriage so he could legally claim assets that belonged to her family. When Webb finished his testimony, Trevor looked smaller somehow, hunched in his chair like the pathetic criminal he'd always been beneath the expensive clothes and practiced charm. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom as Trevor Morrison's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. Conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, and a new charge the prosecutor had added based on Webb's testimony: criminal marriage fraud with intent to commit grand larceny. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling over $8 million, including interest and damages. Since Trevor had already spent most of the money he'd stolen, this meant he would emerge from prison as broke as his victims had been when he'd finished with them. Madison testified during the sentencing hearing, delivering a victim impact statement that left half the courtroom in tears. Trevor Morrison didn't just steal money from me, she said, looking directly at him as he sat shackled at the defendant's table. He stole 2 years of my life, my relationship with my mother, my ability to trust my own judgment, and my faith in love itself. He convinced me that the people who truly cared about me were the enemy, while he was systematically planning to rob me blind. She paused, gathering herself, then continued with steel in her voice. But here's what Trevor didn't understand about the women he targeted. We're not weak. We're not victims waiting to happen. We're strong, intelligent women who were temporarily deceived by an expert liar. And when we discovered the truth, we didn't just walk away, we fought back. Together. Trevor kept his eyes down during Madison's statement, but I saw his shoulders shake when she said, "I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about the lives you destroyed and the women who were strong enough to rebuild them." After the sentencing, we gathered outside the courthouse. Madison, Emma, Sarah, Agent Lou, and me. The media wanted interviews, but we politely declined. This wasn't about publicity or revenge. It was about justice. Emma hugged Madison goodbye. "Thank you for being brave enough to wear that wire. Without your recording, we might never have gotten a conviction." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on your daughter. If you hadn't investigated Trevor's background, he'd still be out there finding new victims." Agent Lou gave us all her card. "You've helped us shut down a predator who might have hurt dozens more women." The FBI appreciates your cooperation, but more importantly, you should be proud of your courage." As the crowd dispersed, Madison and I walked to our cars in comfortable silence. Finally, she turned to me. "Mom, I have something to ask you." "What's it worth, sweetheart?" She smiled, that beautiful smile I'd missed for 2 years. "Would you help me plan a real wedding? Someday, when I find someone who actually deserves me, someone who loves you too, because anyone who can't appreciate my mother isn't worthy of me?" I felt tears sting my eyes. "I would be honored." "And Mom?" "The beach house. I know Trevor made me say those awful things about it not being sophisticated enough. The truth is, I've always dreamed of getting married there, barefoot in the sand, with fairy lights strung between the dunes, just like I used to plan when I was little." "It would be perfect," I said, hugging her tight. As we drove away from the courthouse, I thought about the woman I'd raised. Madison had been temporarily lost, deceived by a master manipulator who had targeted her kindness and turned it against her. But in the end, the strength I'd seen in her as a child had resurged. She'd found her way back to herself and back to me. Trevor Morrison had made one fatal error in his calculations. He'd assumed that isolating Madison from her family would make her vulnerable and dependent. Instead, it had only made our eventual reunion stronger and our combined fury more devastating than he could have imagined. The predator had become the prey, and justice had been served by the very women he'd tried to destroy. Some wedding gifts really do keep on giving, and the gift of truth, once unwrapped, can never be taken back. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.